My son-in-law smiled while humiliating me in front of 12 people at my own dining table. "She doesn't understand finances," Derek said, laughing softly as he reached for another glass of wine. "Honestly, Beverly still thinks saving money in property is smarter than real investing." Everyone went quiet. My daughter Natalie stared at her plate. She didn't defend me. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached beside my chair, opened my old leather portfolio, and slid it across the table toward Derek. "Go ahead," I told him calmly. "Take a look." The smile disappeared from his face the moment he opened the first page. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from tonight. These conversations mean more to me than you know. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay with me through the rest of this journey. I'm Beverly Flores. I'm 67 years old, widowed for almost 9 years, and until recently, I believed I understood the people closest to me. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in the same brick home my husband Harold and I bought in 1984. The neighborhood has changed over the decades. Young couples replaced retired families. Coffee shops appeared where hardware stores used to stand. But inside my home, some things stayed exactly the same. Harold's reading chair still sat beside the fireplace. His old jazz records were still neatly stacked beside the cabinet. And every Sunday morning, I still made coffee for 2 before remembering I was alone. People assume grief softens with time. That isn't true. It simply changes shape. Harold wasn't a flashy man. He never drove expensive cars or wore designer suits. If you passed him in a grocery store, you would have thought he was an ordinary middle-class husband picking up milk and bread after work. But Harold was one of the smartest men I ever knew. When we first married, we had almost nothing. I worked part-time at a dental office while Harold repaired heating systems during the day and studied property markets at night. We skipped vacations. We reused furniture. Some winters we kept the thermostat lower than comfort just to save money. Little by little, Harold started buying small rental properties. Nothing glamorous. Duplexes, old houses needing repairs, small commercial buildings everyone else ignored. And slowly, over 40 years, those investments became a quiet fortune. Not billionaire money, but enough. Enough that we never worried about medical bills. Enough that Natalie could graduate college debt-free. Enough that Harold could leave me secure after he passed away. The strange thing was, we never looked wealthy. Harold hated showing off. "Real money stays quiet," he used to say. I still hear his voice sometimes when I walk through the house late at night. Especially lately, because lately something hasn't felt right. My daughter Natalie used to call me almost every day. She was independent from the moment she learned how to walk. Strong-minded, sharp, organized. Even as a teenager, she color-coded her school assignments and balanced her savings account down to the penny. When she became operations manager at Riverside Medical Center, I wasn't surprised at all. Natalie had always been responsible. Then she met Derek Carter. At first I liked him. Everyone did. Derek knew exactly how to make people comfortable. He remembered birthdays, opened doors, complimented women without sounding inappropriate. He spoke with confidence that made people trust him almost immediately. He worked as a financial advisor and dressed the part perfectly. Tailored suits, expensive watches, smooth voice, firm handshake. When Natalie introduced him to me over dinner 6 years ago, Harold was still alive then. I remember Harold watching Derek carefully across the table while Derek talked about wealth management strategies and long-term portfolio growth. After Derek left that night, I asked Harold what he thought. Harold took a long sip of coffee before answering. "He talks too much. I laughed back then, but Harold didn't laugh. There's a difference, he said quietly, between people who understand money and people who want others to believe they understand money. I didn't think much about it at the time. Natalie fell in love quickly. Derek proposed within 11 months. Their wedding was beautiful, elegant without being excessive. Harold danced with Natalie that night despite the pain in his knees, and I remember crying while watching them together beneath the lights. 2 years later, Harold died from pancreatic cancer. The disease moved fast. Too fast. 1 month we were planning a weekend trip to Michigan. 3 months later, I was holding his hand in hospice care while pretending not to notice the machines slowing beside him. After Harold died, Derek stepped in constantly. At first, I appreciated it. He helped organize paperwork, handled phone calls, explained insurance forms. Natalie leaned heavily on him during that period, and honestly, so did I. Grief makes you vulnerable in ways people don't discuss enough. You become exhausted, confused. You stop questioning things because simply surviving the day takes all your energy. But over time, I began noticing little changes in Natalie. Small things at first. She stopped making decisions without checking with Derek. Simple choices suddenly required discussions, dinner plans, vacation dates, even buying furniture. One afternoon, she came shopping with me for curtains, something we used to enjoy together. Natalie found a blue set she loved, then immediately took out her phone. "I should ask Derek first," she said automatically. I remember staring at her. "About curtains." She laughed awkwardly, but she still texted him. That unsettled me more than I admitted. Then the phone calls became less frequent. Our lunches became shorter. Whenever I asked about work, Natalie sounded distracted, almost nervous, as if she were choosing her words carefully. Meanwhile, Derek became more involved in conversations about my finances. Too involved. At family dinners, he'd casually ask questions. "So what are you doing with the rental income now? Have you thought about restructuring your assets? You know, Beverly, at your age, passive growth matters more than emotional attachment." At your age, he said it so smoothly most people wouldn't notice. But I noticed. One evening, Derek came over to help fix a leak under my kitchen sink. While he worked, I overheard him speaking softly to Natalie in the living room. "She means well," he whispered. "But your mother doesn't really understand modern finance." Something inside me went cold. Not because I needed Derek's approval. I didn't. But because of the way Natalie stayed silent afterward. That silence hurt more than the words themselves. A few weeks later, Natalie canceled our monthly lunch for the 3rd time in a row. Derek scheduled something she explained quickly over the phone. I looked around my quiet kitchen after hanging up. The house suddenly felt enormous. Empty. For the first time in years, I walked into Harold's office and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside were old property records, trust documents, investment reports, and handwritten notes in Harold's careful script. One sentence was underlined twice in blue ink. "Protect Natalie, even from people she loves." I sat there for a long time staring at those words. At the time, I didn't fully understand why Harold had written them. But deep down, I think part of me already knew. And a week later, Derek would confirm every fear I was trying desperately not to believe. The first time Natalie admitted something was wrong, she tried to disguise it as a joke. We were sitting in a small cafe near downtown Columbus, the kind with mismatched chairs and homemade blueberry muffins displayed behind glass counters. It used to be one of our favorite places. Years ago, Natalie and I would spend entire Saturday mornings there talking about work relationships, dreams, and family gossip. But lately our conversations felt careful, measured, like she was constantly checking invisible boundaries. That afternoon, Natalie looked exhausted. There were dark circles beneath her eyes, and she kept glancing at her phone every few minutes. "Busy day?" I asked gently. "You have no idea," she sighed. The waitress brought our coffee, and for a few moments things almost felt normal again. Then Natalie laughed suddenly, though there wasn't any real humor in it. "You know what's embarrassing?" she said quietly. "I tried using one of our accounts yesterday and my card got declined." I looked up slowly. "What happened?" "Oh, nothing," she answered too quickly. Derek moved some things around. Something inside me tightened immediately. "What do you mean he moved things around?" Natalie stirred her coffee without drinking it. "He consolidated accounts, simplified everything. Without telling you?" She hesitated. "He told me eventually." Eventually. I hated that word. When did this happen? "A few weeks ago." I stared at my daughter across the table and suddenly realized how tense her shoulders looked all the time now. Natalie used to carry herself with confidence. Even during stressful periods at work, she had always seemed grounded. Now she looked uncertain in her own skin. "You're married," I said carefully. "That money belongs to both of you." "I know that. Then why didn't you know your own card would stop working?" Natalie finally looked at me, and for one brief second, I saw something fragile behind her expression. Fear. But it disappeared almost immediately. "You're overthinking this, Mom," she said softly. "Derek just handles finances differently." That sentence bothered me for days afterward. Not because of the words themselves, because they sounded rehearsed, as if she'd repeated them many times already. Over the next few months, I noticed more changes. Natalie stopped talking about money altogether. Whenever bills, savings, or investments came up, she deferred automatically to Derek. "Oh, Derek takes care of that. You should ask Derek. Derek says this market is unstable." At family gatherings, Derek dominated every financial conversation in the room. He spoke with the confidence of a television expert: interest rates, inflation, real estate cycles, retirement structures. He used complicated language so effortlessly that people rarely questioned him. And if someone did question him, Derek smiled in a way that made them feel unintelligent for asking. Especially me. One Sunday evening, Natalie and Derek came over for dinner. I made Harold's favorite roast chicken recipe, though cooking for only 3 people still felt unnatural after all these years. At first, dinner went smoothly. Derek talked about the economy. Natalie nodded beside him quietly. Then Derek looked around my dining room and smiled. "You know, Beverly, this house alone could probably generate incredible returns if leveraged properly." I set down my fork carefully. "I'm not interested in leveraging my home." "Well, emotionally, I understand that," he replied smoothly. "But financially speaking, older generations sometimes hold on to property for sentimental reasons instead of maximizing asset performance." "Older generations." Again. Natalie shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I kept my voice calm. "This house was built with 40 years of work." "Of course," Derek said quickly. "I'm just saying money should evolve. Sitting on assets is outdated." I noticed the subtle look he gave Natalie after saying it, as if waiting for her approval. And heartbreakingly, she gave him a small nod. That hurt more than I expected. After dinner, Natalie helped me wash dishes while Derek took a phone call outside. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked quietly, "Are you happy?" Natalie froze. "What kind of question is that?" "A mother's question." She kept scrubbing the same plate far too long. "Derek loves me." "That's not what I asked." Her eyes filled slightly before she looked away. We're just stressed financially right now. The sentence caught my attention immediately. Financially stressed. Natalie bit her lip, realizing she had said too much. What does that mean? Nothing serious. Natalie. She lowered her voice. Derek had some investments tied up longer than expected. How much longer, I don't know. You don't know. He handles most of it. That answer chilled me, because my daughter was not careless by nature. She had once spent 3 hours comparing mortgage rates before buying a washing machine. Now she didn't know basic details about her own finances. Before I could press further, Derek walked back inside, smiling. Everything okay in here? Natalie immediately straightened. Fine, she answered quickly. Too quickly. That night after they left, I barely slept. I kept replaying small moments in my head. The tension in Natalie's voice, the way she glanced toward Derek before answering questions, the carefulness, the shrinking. A week later, I invited Natalie to lunch again. This time she arrived nearly 40 minutes late. I'm sorry, she said breathlessly as she sat down. Derek needed the car. You share 2 vehicles. He was using both. That made no sense, but I let it go. Halfway through lunch, Natalie's phone buzzed. I watched her entire expression change the moment she saw Derek's name. Not happiness, anxiety. She answered immediately. Hey. Pause. No, I told you I'm with Mom. Another pause. Natalie's shoulders tightened. I said I'll be home soon. Longer silence. Then softly. Okay. When she hung up, I looked at her carefully. You don't have to report your location every minute. She forced a smile. He just worries. No, I said quietly. He monitors. Natalie looked startled by the word. For a second, I thought she might finally open up completely. Instead, she stood abruptly. I should go. Natalie, I really should go. I watched her hurry out of the restaurant with tears gathering in her eyes. That evening, I sat alone in Harold's office again. I opened one of the old investment folders and stared at our financial history, every property, every account, every decision Harold and I made together over decades. Not once had he ever made me feel incapable. Not once. Harold explained everything to me because he believed partnership meant respect. Derek did the opposite. He used knowledge like a weapon. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think something I had been resisting for months. Maybe Derek wasn't simply arrogant. Maybe he was dangerous. Then 3 nights later, Natalie accidentally confirmed my worst fear. She called me crying at nearly midnight. Mom, she whispered, her voice shaking. I think Derek changed passwords on one of our accounts. And I don't know why. My heart dropped instantly. How much money are we talking about? There was silence on the line. Then Natalie answered with words that made my blood run cold. I honestly don't know anymore. The lake house was Harold's favorite place in the world. Even after all these years, driving up the narrow gravel road still made my chest ache in ways I couldn't explain. The property sat beside Lake Briarwood, about 2 hours outside Columbus, surrounded by tall oak trees and silence so deep you could hear the water moving against the dock at night. Harold bought that land 33 years ago. Back then, it was nothing more than an old cabin with broken windows and a leaking roof. Everyone told us it was a terrible investment. But Harold saw possibility where other people saw decay. That was his gift. Over the years, we rebuilt the place together, piece by piece. Harold installed the cedar floors himself. Natalie painted the upstairs bedrooms when she was 16. Every corner of that house carried memories. which is why I immediately felt uneasy when Derek suggested we spend Memorial Day weekend there. Family bonding, he called it. The moment we arrived, Derek started evaluating everything. Not admiring, evaluating. He walked through rooms, slowly studying windows, ceilings, land measurements. At first, I tried convincing myself I was imagining things. Then he started asking questions. How many acres is this exactly? When was the property last appraised? Lakefront taxes around here must be insane. I answered politely, though each question tightened something inside me. Natalie noticed it too. Derek, she said lightly, can we not turn this into a business seminar for one weekend? He laughed. I'm just curious. But he wasn't curious. He was calculating. That became painfully obvious on the second evening. We were sitting outside on the back deck after dinner. The lake reflected the orange glow of sunset while cicadas buzzed softly through the trees. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. Then Derek leaned back in his chair and said casually, You know, Beverly, this property alone could probably sell for over $2 million in today's market. I looked at him carefully. I've never considered selling it. Well, emotionally, I understand why he replied smoothly. But financially, keeping this much equity tied up in one sentimental asset doesn't make much sense. Natalie sighed quietly beside him. Derek. No, seriously, he continued. You could liquidate this place, diversify the capital, generate stronger passive income, and reduce maintenance headaches. I folded my napkins slowly. This house isn't a headache. He smiled the way people smile at stubborn children. I'm just saying older investors sometimes struggle to adapt emotionally. Older investors. Again. I noticed Natalie staring down at her wine glass. Not defending me. Not defending him either. Just surviving the conversation. That silence told me more than words could. I kept my voice calm. Harold and I managed our investments just fine for 40 years. Yes, but markets evolve, Derek answered immediately. Modern wealth management requires a more aggressive mindset. Aggressive. The word lingered unpleasantly in the air. Then Derek made a mistake. A very revealing mistake. Well, at least the northern property line issue was resolved before values increased. I froze. Slowly, I turned toward him. What northern property line issue? For the first time all weekend, Derek hesitated, only for half a second. But I saw it. Oh, he said casually. I came across some county records online. My stomach tightened instantly. That boundary dispute had been private legal business 15 years earlier. There was no reason Derek would randomly research it unless he had intentionally gone looking through records connected to my property. Why, Natalie looked confused too. You researched Mom's land records? Derek laughed softly. I research everything. Occupational habit. But now I was paying very close attention. The next morning I woke early and found Derek alone on the dock with his laptop open. He closed the screen quickly when he noticed me approaching. Couldn't sleep, he asked. Not much lately. I sat carefully in one of the old wooden chairs Harold built years ago. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Derek smiled politely. You know, Beverly, I really do worry about your financial future. I almost laughed. My future. You're comfortable now, obviously, but long-term wealth preservation gets complicated with age. There it was again. That tone. That subtle implication that I was fragile. Confused. Outdated. I appreciate your concern, I answered calmly. You should. He leaned forward slightly. A lot of older people become vulnerable financially because they trust instinct over strategy. I studied him carefully. And what exactly do you think my strategy is? He shrugged. Honestly, I think Harold handled most of this. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because he offended me, because suddenly I understood something important. Derek genuinely believed I was intellectually dependent on my late husband. He assumed I was simply the widow left behind, not the woman who spent 40 years building beside Harold. That misunderstanding would eventually become his biggest mistake. But at that moment, I said nothing. I simply stood and walked back toward the house. Inside, Natalie was making coffee in the kitchen. She looked exhausted already. "Mom," she whispered the moment Derek stepped outside again, "please don't argue with him this weekend." I stared at her. "I'm not the one creating tension." "I know." Her voice cracked slightly. I can't deal with another fight." Another fight. That phrase stayed with me. "How often are you two fighting?" Natalie immediately looked away. "We're fine. No happy person says we're fine like that." I walked closer carefully. "Natalie, look at me." Slowly she did, and what I saw in my daughter's eyes frightened me. She looked emotionally tired. Not angry, not frustrated, worn down, like someone who had been defending themselves for too long. "He's under pressure," she whispered. "A few investments didn't work out the way he expected." "How bad is it? I don't know." "You still don't know." Her silence answered for her. Before I could say more, Derek walked back inside carrying his laptop. Instantly, Natalie's entire posture changed. She straightened, smiled weakly, became careful again. That transformation broke my heart. Later that afternoon, Derek offered to grill dinner while Natalie and I cleaned upstairs bedrooms. For the first time all weekend, we were finally alone. Natalie folded blankets mechanically while I changed sheets. Then quietly, almost too quietly to hear, she said, "Sometimes he makes me feel stupid." I stopped moving immediately. "What?" Her eyes filled with tears, though she kept folding laundry. "When I ask questions about money, he gets irritated. He says I panic too easily, that I don't understand how investing works." I felt rage rise slowly inside my chest. Not explosive rage. Cold rage. The kind that settles deep. "Natalie," I said carefully, "you graduated top of your class. You manage hospital operations. You oversee $1 million budgets every year." "I know. Then why are you letting him convince you you're incapable?" She looked down. "Because every time I question him, he makes me feel like I'm overreacting." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Derek wasn't simply controlling finances, he was controlling confidence. And once someone loses confidence in their own judgment, they become easier to manipulate. That evening, after Natalie went to bed early with a headache, Derek and I remained alone on the deck. The lake was dark now. Quiet. Dangerously quiet. Derek sipped bourbon while watching the water. Then casually, without even looking at me, he said something that made every instinct inside me come alive. "You know," he murmured, "families with significant assets really should centralize control before things get messy later." I looked at him slowly, and in that moment I finally understood. This was never about helping Natalie. This was never about financial advice. Derek wasn't looking at our family. He was looking at an estate. The Monday after we returned from the lake house, I called Victor Langley. Harold used to joke that Victor charged by the sigh. Every time legal paperwork became complicated, Victor would remove his glasses, rub his forehead, and sigh like the weight of civilization rested entirely on his shoulders. We'd known him for over 30 years. He handled our trust's property agreements, wills, and business filings long before Natalie was even born. More importantly, Victor was one of the few people Harold trusted completely. When his secretary answered, I almost changed my mind. Part of me still wanted to believe I was overreacting. Maybe Derek was arrogant but harmless. Maybe I was becoming paranoid with age. But then I remembered Natalie's voice trembling over the phone. I don't know anymore. That sentence stayed with me like a warning bell. Victor Langley's office, the secretary said warmly. This is Beverly Flores. Within an hour, I was sitting across from Victor in his downtown office overlooking High Street. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him. More gray hair, thinner face, but his eyes were still sharp. Beverly? He said gently. What's wrong? Not hello. Not how are you. What's wrong? Because Victor knew me well enough to recognize I wouldn't schedule an urgent meeting without reason. I took a slow breath. I need you to tell me something honestly. All right. If someone wanted access to family assets through marriage, how would they do it? Victor's expression changed immediately. He leaned back slowly in his chair. That's a very specific question. I told him everything. Not just recent events. Everything. The comments. The pressure. Natalie losing access to accounts. Derek researching property records. The sudden obsession with restructuring assets. Victor listened quietly without interrupting once. When I finished, the office felt unusually silent. Finally, he removed his glasses and sighed. That bad, I asked quietly. Possibly worse. Cold spread through my chest. Victor opened a folder on his desk. About 6 months ago, Derek Carter contacted me. I stared at him. What? He wanted information about the Flores trust structures. I felt physically sick. What did you tell him? Nothing useful. Victor's voice hardened slightly. I informed him that Harold's estate documents are private. My hands tightened together. He approached you behind our backs. Yes. Did Natalie know? I honestly don't think so. That answer hurt most of all. Victor folded his hands carefully. Beverly. I did some checking afterward because the conversation bothered me. Checking. There are concerns surrounding Derek's business. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Victor turned his computer screen toward me. Several articles appeared. Small financial publications, consumer complaint reports, regulatory notices. Nothing major enough to make national headlines. But enough. One headline caught my eye immediately. Local investment client files. Civil complaint against Carter Financial Group. Below it was a woman's name. Claire Benson. Victor spoke quietly. She's 68. Retired schoolteacher. Claims Derek advised her into high-risk investments she didn't fully understand. How much did she lose? Victor hesitated. Almost $400,000. My stomach turned. That was her retirement. Yes. I looked back at the screen in disbelief. How is he still licensed? The case hasn't been fully resolved. Victor studied me carefully. Beverly, I need you to understand something. Men like Derek rarely start with direct theft. What do you mean they build dependency first? The sentence landed heavily between us. Victor continued carefully. They make the other person feel incapable, confused, financially insecure. Then they slowly position themselves as the only trusted authority. Natalie. Every conversation suddenly looked different in my mind. Every apology, every hesitation, every nervous glance toward Derek. I swallowed hard. What should I do? Victor's expression softened slightly. Right now, don't confront him. That surprised me. Why not? Because if Derek's finances are unstable, confrontation may accelerate his behavior. I frowned. Accelerate. Desperate people make dangerous decisions. The room suddenly felt colder. Victor opened another file. I also spoke to Denise Holloway. I blinked. Our old accountant? She retired from your accounts years ago, but she still monitors local financial networks occasionally. Victor slid several printed documents toward me. At first glance, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then slowly patterns emerged. Late tax payments, business loans, short-term debt restructuring, large cash movements between accounts. Is this bad? I asked quietly. Victor gave a humorless smile. This is the financial equivalent of duct tape holding together a collapsing wall. I stared down at the papers. Derek presented himself like a successful financial expert. Luxury watches, business conferences, expensive dinners. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, his company appeared unstable, possibly desperate. Victor lowered his voice. There's more. I almost didn't want to hear it. One of Derek's former business associates agreed to speak confidentially. Who Mason Reed? The name sounded vaguely familiar. He worked with Derek years ago before leaving Carter Financial. Why did he leave? Victor's eyes hardened. He claims Derek became obsessed with appearances. What does that mean? He started taking larger risks to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't actually support. My mind immediately went to Natalie. The vacations, the expensive restaurants, the designer furniture. Had any of it even been real? Victor continued. Mason believes Derek's cash flow problems have worsened significantly over the last year. I stared at him. How significant he thinks Derek may be trying to secure long-term access to outside family assets. The room went completely silent. Outside the office window, people crossed busy downtown streets, carrying coffees and briefcases, living ordinary lives completely unaware that mine had just shifted permanently. I suddenly remembered Harold's handwritten note. Protect Natalie, even from people she loves. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. Harold had seen something years before I did. Victor's voice softened. Beverly, has Natalie signed anything recently I don't know? You need to find out. Fear settled heavily in my stomach, because suddenly I realized something terrifying. If Derek was truly targeting family assets, then Natalie wasn't simply emotionally manipulated. She might already be legally vulnerable too. That evening I drove home in silence. Rain streaked across the windshield while Harold's old jazz station played softly through the speakers. Normally driving helped me think clearly. Not this time. I kept imagining Natalie sitting beside Derek at their dining table, trusting him while he quietly rearranged pieces of her life around her. When I arrived home, I found myself standing in Harold's office again. I opened the safe hidden behind the bookshelf and removed several old folders, trust structures, property ownership records, emergency protections. Harold insisted we established decades ago. At the time, I thought he was overly cautious. Now I understood. Harold grew up poor, truly poor. The kind of poor where one bad decision destroyed entire families. He trusted very few people around money, especially charming men. I sat there for nearly an hour reviewing documents while rain tapped against the windows outside. Then my phone rang. Natalie. Immediately I answered. Honey. Her breathing sounded uneven. Mom. What happened? Long silence. Then finally Derek wants me to sign some new financial paperwork tomorrow. Every muscle in my body tightened instantly. What kind of paperwork? He says it's routine. I closed my eyes slowly, because deep down I already knew. Nothing about this was routine anymore. Natalie showed up at my house at 11:43 that night. I remember the exact time because I had been sitting awake in the living room pretending to read while secretly watching the clock every few minutes. The moment I heard her car pull into the driveway, my heart dropped. Something was wrong. Not ordinary stress. Not another marital argument. Something deeper. When I opened the front door, Natalie stood there, clutching her purse against her chest like armor. Her mascara had smeared beneath her eyes, and her hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold her keys. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered immediately. The second I touched her shoulder, she broke. Not graceful crying, not quiet tears. She collapsed into sobs so violent her knees nearly gave out beneath her. I wrapped my arms around her instinctively and guided her inside while she shook against me like a frightened child. And suddenly, for one heartbreaking moment, she wasn't 38 years old anymore. She was 6. 6 years old after falling off her bicycle. 6 years old waking from thunderstorms. 6 years old needing her mother to make the world feel safe again. I sat her down on the couch and brought her water while she struggled to breathe normally. "It's okay," I kept saying softly. "You're safe here." That word mattered. Safe. Because deep down, I think Natalie no longer felt safe in her own marriage. For several minutes, she couldn't speak clearly enough to explain anything. Finally, after the shaking eased slightly, she whispered, "I feel so stupid." Instant anger flashed through me. Not at her. At him. "No," I said firmly. "You are not stupid." She stared down at her hands. "He always says I panic over nothing. That's because he benefits when you doubt yourself." Natalie's eyes filled again. "You sound just like Grandpa." I blinked. What Dad used to say the same thing. Her voice cracked. He said confidence is how manipulative people control smart women. The mention of Harold nearly shattered me, because suddenly I could hear his voice so clearly in my memory. Teach her to trust herself. I sat beside Natalie carefully. "Tell me everything." And slowly, painfully, she did. Over the next 2 hours, pieces of the truth finally emerged. Not all at once. Trauma rarely comes out cleanly. It comes in fragments. Apologies, confessions, moments someone has been too ashamed to say aloud. Natalie explained how Derek slowly took over every financial responsibility after Harold died. At first it sounded reasonable. "He said I was overwhelmed with grief," she whispered. And honestly, I was. Of course she was. We both were. So Derek started helping. He handled bills, then investments, then tax filings, then retirement planning, then passwords, then account access. Each step looked small by itself. Helpful even. Until one day Natalie realized she no longer understood her own financial life. "I used to know every dollar I had," she said through tears. "Now I feel nervous even asking questions." I took her hand gently. That didn't happen accidentally. She looked away immediately, as though even agreeing with me felt disloyal somehow. That alone told me how deeply Derek had conditioned her. Then Natalie confessed something that made my stomach twist. He gets angry when I question him in front of other people. What kind of angry? She hesitated, not screaming. That answer disturbed me more than yelling would have, because controlled anger is often more frightening. She swallowed hard. He talks to me like I'm embarrassing him. I closed my eyes briefly. Humiliation. That was his weapon. Not fists. Not shouting. Humiliation. Slowly convincing Natalie she was incapable of functioning without him. Then she finally showed me the documents. She pulled several folded papers from her purse with visibly shaking hands. I took pictures before I left. I spread them across the coffee table carefully. At first glance, they looked like ordinary financial planning forms. Trust adjustments, authorization agreements, beneficiary restructuring. But the longer I read, the colder I became, because buried inside the language were clauses granting Derek alarming levels of access and decision-making authority. One document particularly caught my attention. "What is this?" I asked quietly. Natalie rubbed her forehead. He said it was estate coordination paperwork. My chest tightened immediately. "Did you sign this?" "Not yet." "Thank God." I pointed toward a paragraph halfway down the page. "Natalie, do you understand what this means?" She stared blankly. "No." "That clause would allow Derek to act on your behalf regarding future inherited assets." Her face lost color instantly. "What he could potentially influence decisions tied to your inheritance structures." Natalie looked physically ill. "That's not what he told me." "Of course it wasn't." Tears rolled down her cheeks again. "Oh my God." I kept reading. Every page revealed something worse. Indirect control language, financial authorization pathways, access mechanisms hidden beneath dense legal wording most people would never fully examine. Derek knew exactly what he was doing. And suddenly, another realization hit me. He expected you to trust him enough not to read carefully. Natalie nodded weakly. "He always says I overcomplicate paperwork." "No." He discouraged scrutiny. "There's a difference." I leaned back slowly, trying to control my breathing. Years ago, Harold warned Natalie about men who used intelligence as intimidation. Not educated men, not successful men, men who weaponized expertise to make others feel small. At the time, Natalie thought Harold was being overprotective. Now she finally understood. "I can't believe I let this happen," she whispered. I turned toward her sharply. "Listen to me very carefully." Natalie looked up. "This is not your shame." Fresh tears spilled down her face. He made me feel crazy every time I questioned something. "That's manipulation." He said I was emotional. "That's manipulation too." Her breathing became uneven again. And the worst part, she whispered, "Sometimes I actually believed him." That sentence broke my heart completely, because I knew exactly how strong my daughter used to be. Derek hadn't simply taken financial control. He had dismantled her confidence piece by piece until she no longer trusted her own instincts. And once someone reaches that point, they become easier to control in every area of life. I moved closer and held her hands firmly. "Natalie, look at me." Slowly she did. "You are not weak." Her lips trembled. "You are not stupid." A tear slid down her cheek. "And you are not trapped." For the first time all night, something shifted slightly in her expression. Not relief? Not yet. But maybe the smallest flicker of hope. Then Natalie whispered something that made the room go silent. He wants another meeting this weekend. My stomach tightened immediately. What kind of meeting? He said we need to finalize long-term family protection documents. Alarm rushed through me instantly. Who's attending a notary? Of course. Natalie looked terrified again. He said it's routine. No, I said quietly. It's strategic. She wrapped her arms around herself. What do I do? I thought carefully before answering. Every instinct inside me wanted to storm into Derek's office immediately and expose everything. But Victor had been right. Men like Derek became dangerous when cornered. And right now Derek still believed I was harmless. An emotional widow. An older woman who didn't understand finances. Good. Let him keep believing that. I squeezed Natalie's hand gently. You don't sign anything. She nodded slowly. And you don't confront him yet either. Fear crossed her face. He'll know something changed. Then let him underestimate us. Natalie stared at me. Us. I don't think she realized how badly she needed to hear that word until that moment. Because for months, Derek had isolated her emotionally, made her feel alone. But she wasn't alone anymore. I stood and walked toward Harold's office. Inside the safe were decades of preparation, trust structures, asset protections, contingency plans. Harold always believed responsible wealth meant protecting family not only from strangers, but sometimes from the people invited closest to them. As I looked through those documents, one thought became painfully clear. Derek thought he was playing a long game. He had no idea Harold Flores had started preparing for this years before Derek ever entered our lives. Derek scheduled the meeting for Saturday afternoon, not at a law office, not at his financial firm, at my house. That detail alone told me everything. He wanted familiarity, comfort, emotional pressure disguised as family concern. By the time Saturday arrived, I had already spent 2 full evenings reviewing documents with Victor Langley. Every trust structure Harold and I created had layers Derek didn't know existed, and that ignorance was about to matter. At exactly 1:07 p.m., Derek pulled into my driveway with Natalie beside him and a woman I didn't recognize sitting in the back seat. The notary. I watched through the living room window while Derek stepped out carrying an expensive leather briefcase. He looked polished as always, calm, confident, controlled. But once you know someone is manipulating you, their charm starts looking very different. Suddenly, every smile feels rehearsed, every gesture calculated. I opened the front door before they could knock. Beverly, Derek said warmly, leaning in for a quick hug I had no interest in returning. Thanks for doing this. Doing this. As though we were discussing lunch reservations instead of legal access to family assets. Natalie looked pale. The notary introduced herself politely. Karen Mitchell. I shook her hand gently. She seemed uncomfortable already, though she probably didn't know why. We sat around my dining room table, the same table where Harold once helped Natalie with algebra homework, where birthdays had been celebrated, where holidays had filled the house with laughter. Now it felt like a negotiation room. Derek opened his briefcase smoothly and spread documents across the table. Nothing complicated, he said casually. Just smart long-term planning. I smiled politely. Well, you know me. I'm old-fashioned. I like understanding what I sign. For the first time, something flickered behind his expression. Irritation. Tiny. Fast. But there. Of course, he replied. Though honestly, most of it is standard language. Standard language, People say that when they hope you won't read carefully. I adjusted my glasses slowly and began reviewing the first document page by page. Silence filled the room except for paper turning. After about 3 minutes, Derek shifted in his chair. "Everything okay, I'm reading." Another minute passed, then another. Derek's jaw tightened slightly. Finally, he leaned forward. "Beverly, these forms are extremely routine." I looked up calmly. "Then there shouldn't be any rush." Karen the notary suddenly became very interested in her coffee cup. "Good. Let her notice the tension." I continued reading. Most of the first document involved broad financial coordination language, harmless on the surface. But buried beneath the legal wording were subtle authority transfers connected to future asset management decisions. Exactly what Victor predicted. Then I reached the second document. And there it was. A clause allowing expanded advisory authority over trust-connected assets if Natalie became primary beneficiary following my death. Carefully worded. Indirect. But dangerous. I looked at Derek quietly. "What exactly does this section mean?" He answered too quickly. "It's just procedural flexibility." "No," I said calmly. "That's not what I asked." The room became very still. Derek forced a smile. "It simply allows smoother management transitions." "Management by whom?" A flicker again. Small, sharp, family-appointed financial oversight. I turned another page slowly. "And who would that be?" Derek's voice tightened slightly. "Well, naturally, I already manage many of Natalie's investment structures." There it was. Not suggestion. Positioning. I noticed Natalie staring at the papers now instead of Derek. Good. For the first time in months, she was paying attention instead of automatically trusting him. I placed the document down carefully. This language creates indirect access pathways to trust assets. Karen the notary looked up immediately. Derek laughed softly. "No, Beverly, that's not. It absolutely is." Silence. Real silence this time. The kind that changes a room permanently. Derek leaned back slowly. "I think you may be misunderstanding the legal structure." That sentence almost made me smile. Because men like Derek always assume older women fear sounding uninformed, but Harold spent 40 years teaching me every single piece of our financial world, not because he doubted me, because he respected me. I folded my hands calmly. "No, Derek, I understand it perfectly." Natalie looked between us nervously. "Wait, Mom, what are you saying exactly?" I turned toward her gently. "I'm saying this paperwork gives Derek potential influence over inherited family assets through advisory control structures." Natalie's face lost color instantly. Derek spoke quickly. "That's a dramatic interpretation." "No," I answered evenly. "It's an accurate one." His mask slipped then. Only slightly, but enough. For the first time since I met him, I saw genuine anger beneath the polished exterior. "Beverly," he said carefully with respect, "these structures are common in advanced financial planning." With respect, I replied, "I don't think you expected me to understand what I was reading." Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair again. Natalie stared at Derek now with growing confusion. "You told me this was just protection paperwork." "It is," Derek snapped. "Too fast. Too defensive." Then he softened his tone immediately. "For the family. Family. Manipulative people love that word, because it disguises control as love." I stood slowly from the table. "I need a moment." Without waiting for a response, I walked into Harold's office and closed the door behind me. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I needed to think carefully. Through the wall, I could hear muffled voices from the dining room, Natalie asking questions, Derek answering too quickly. I opened the safe behind Harold's bookshelf and removed several folders Victor prepared earlier that week. Then I stared at Harold's photograph sitting on the desk. "You saw this coming, didn't you?" I whispered. Sometimes grief feels strangely alive, like the people we lose leave fingerprints behind on the decisions that save us later. I took a slow breath and returned to the dining room. The tension had changed completely. Natalie looked shaken now. Derek looked irritated. Karen looked like she regretted accepting the appointment entirely. I sat down calmly. "I won't be signing anything today." Derek's composure cracked immediately. "Beverly, delaying this serves no purpose. It serves mine. These protections matter, then my attorney can review them first." That hit him hard. I could see it instantly. "Your attorney?" "Yes. Victor Langley." For the first time all afternoon, Derek went completely still. Not dramatic, not explosive. Still. And in that stillness, I finally saw fear. Because Derek knew exactly who Victor was. And more importantly, he understood what Victor represented. Scrutiny, legal resistance, exposure. Derek recovered quickly, but not fast enough. "Well," he said carefully, "bringing attorneys into family matters can create unnecessary tension." I almost laughed at that. Unnecessary tension, as if he hadn't spent years quietly dismantling my daughter's confidence while positioning himself near our assets. Natalie suddenly spoke very softly. "Why didn't you explain the inheritance sections to me before Derek turned toward her immediately?" "Natalie, you're letting this become bigger than it is." "Am I?" The room froze again, because that was the first time Natalie had openly challenged him in front of me. Derek noticed it too. His eyes sharpened slightly. "Natalie?" "No," she interrupted quietly. "Answer me honestly." He forced another calm smile. "Everything I've done has been to protect our future." But now the words sounded rehearsed even to her. I could see it happening in real time. The spell weakening. Manipulation loses power once someone finally starts questioning it. Derek gathered the papers abruptly. "If everyone's emotional today, maybe we should revisit this later." "Emotional?" "Of course. Another classic tactic. Dismiss concern by labeling it irrational." But this time Natalie noticed. I watched the realization cross her face slowly, painfully. Karen stood awkwardly. "I think I should probably go." "Yes," I said gently. "I think that's best." After she left, Derek packed his briefcase in tight, angry movements. No warmth now, no charm, just contained frustration. Before leaving, he looked directly at me. "You're making a mistake, Beverly." I met his stare calmly. "No," I said quietly. "You did." And as I watched him walk toward the front door, I realized something important. Derek came here expecting control. Instead, for the first time, he had lost it. 3 days after the meeting at my house, Derek invited us to dinner. Not privately, publicly. A large dinner party at an upscale restaurant in downtown Columbus, with several of his business associates, 2 couples from his social circle, and a few potential investment clients. The invitation itself was strategic. Derek wanted an audience. Men like him often confuse performance with power. Natalie didn't want to go. "I'm tired," she whispered when she called me earlier that afternoon. "And honestly, I don't want to sit there pretending everything's normal." "You don't have to pretend," I told her gently. But she still went. because after years of emotional conditioning, confrontation still frightened her, and I went because I wanted to see Derek carefully, really see him. The restaurant was elegant in that modern, expensive way designed to impress people. Low golden lighting, marble tables, waiters in black uniforms pouring wine before glasses were empty. Derek thrived in places like that. The moment we arrived, his entire personality shifted into performance mode. Charming, confident, smooth. He introduced Natalie and me to everyone at the table with polished ease. "This is my mother-in-law, Beverly Flores." One of the men smiled politely. "Derek says your family has owned property in Ohio forever." I returned the smile. "My husband and I invested over many years." Derek chuckled lightly beside me. "Beverly still believes real estate is the safest investment strategy." The table laughed softly. Not cruelly, just socially. But Derek looked directly at me when he said it, testing me. I smiled calmly. "It worked well for Harold and me." "Oh, absolutely," Derek replied quickly. "Though modern portfolio diversification is obviously more sophisticated now." One of the women leaned forward curiously. "So Derek manages your investments too?" Before I could answer, Derek spoke for me. "I try to help where I can. Beverly's generation wasn't exactly taught advanced financial literacy. There it was, right there in public, carefully wrapped in fake politeness." The entire table went awkwardly quiet for a second. I noticed Natalie stiffen beside me immediately. "Derek," she whispered. But he kept going. "Honestly, older people sometimes get emotionally attached to assets instead of understanding actual market optimization." I looked at him steadily across the candlelight. "You seem very interested in my finances." He smiled. "I'm interested in protecting family wealth." "No." He was interested in controlling it. I could feel the energy at the table changing now. Even the strangers sensed tension beneath Derek's polished tone. Then Derek made the mistake that destroyed him. One of the men asked casually, "So, Beverly, do you let Derek advise your investments?" Derek laughed before I could answer. "She doesn't really understand finances." Just like that. Simple. Dismissive. Public. And suddenly every conversation, every insult, every moment Natalie doubted herself collapsed into perfect clarity, because humiliation had always been the point. Control through embarrassment. Make women feel incapable long enough and eventually they surrender decision-making willingly. The table became completely silent. Natalie looked horrified. "Derek." But I held up one hand gently. Then I did exactly what I'd planned to do all week. Calmly, without anger, I reached beside my chair and lifted the old leather portfolio Harold bought me 22 years earlier. I placed it carefully in front of Derek. "You're right," I said softly. "Maybe I should learn something." Derek smiled smugly, assuming he'd won. "Beverly, I didn't mean—" "Go ahead," I interrupted calmly. "Open it." People exchanged uncomfortable glances around the table. Natalie stared at me nervously. Derek hesitated only briefly before flipping open the portfolio. And then everything changed. The confidence vanished from his face almost immediately. First confusion, then disbelief, then fear. Real fear. Because the first pages weren't emotional keepsakes or outdated property records like he expected. They were numbers. Massive numbers. Commercial property ownership documents, dividend account summaries, investment partnership reports, private trust structures, long-term asset holdings across 3 states. Harold and I had spent 40 years building quiet wealth while people underestimated us. And Derek was just realizing exactly how badly he misunderstood me. The table sat frozen while he turned pages silently. One of the men finally spoke. Jesus Christ. Derek's hands tightened around the folder. I remained perfectly calm. You see, Derek, I said quietly, Harold and I weren't saving randomly. We built diversified income structures before you graduated college. Natalie stared at me in shock. Mom? I looked at her gently. Your father believed women should understand every dollar connected to their lives. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Derek turned another page, then another, and suddenly he stopped moving entirely. Because halfway through the portfolio were documents he absolutely did not expect. Regulatory complaints, business debt records, civil filings connected to Carter Financial Group, Claire Benson's complaint, loan restructuring summaries. Everything Victor and I uncovered. Derek slowly looked up at me. The color had completely drained from his face. Where did you get this? He asked quietly. I folded my hands together. The same way responsible people research anyone asking for access to family assets. Nobody at the table moved. Nobody touched their food. One of Derek's business associates reached awkwardly for his water glass. Natalie looked back and forth between us like her entire reality was rearranging in real time. Then Derek made another mistake. He laughed. Not naturally, desperately. This is ridiculous. Is it? I asked calmly. These are distortions. Are the debts distortions too? His jaw tightened. You don't understand business leverage. And there it was again. That phrase, you don't understand. Except now nobody at the table believed him anymore. I leaned slightly forward. No, Derek. I understand perfectly. What I don't understand is why you researched my properties, approached my attorney, privately pressured Natalie into signing authorization documents, and positioned yourself near our trust structures while your own finances were collapsing. Natalie gasped softly beside me. The entire table went dead silent. Derek's polished mask finally cracked. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then explain it. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because manipulators rely heavily on confidence. Once confidence breaks publicly, the performance collapses quickly. I watched panic begin spreading beneath his expression. Not guilt. Fear. Fear of exposure. One of the women at the table suddenly asked quietly, Derek, is this true? He ignored her completely. Instead, he looked directly at Natalie. Your mother is trying to turn you against me. That sentence finally did it. Because for the first time, Natalie heard the manipulation clearly, not hidden, not softened, direct. Slowly, painfully, she pulled her hand away from his beneath the table. And Derek noticed immediately. The look on his face changed instantly. Cold, sharp, dangerous. Only for a second. But I saw it. So did Natalie. And suddenly I realized something important. This dinner wasn't just humiliating for Derek. It was the first moment Natalie truly saw him without the mask. I stood calmly and closed the portfolio. I spent months wondering whether I was imagining things I said quietly, but intelligent women are not confused simply because arrogant men call them emotional. Natalie began crying silently beside me. I touched her hand gently. Then I looked directly at Derek one final time. You said I don't understand finances, I told him softly. But Derek, you never understood the family you were trying to manipulate. And for the first time since I met him, Derek Carter had absolutely nothing to say. The ride home from the restaurant felt unreal. Natalie sat beside me in complete silence while rain streaked across the windshield. Downtown Columbus blurred outside the windows in soft reflections of gold and white, but inside the car the air felt heavy enough to suffocate us both. She hadn't spoken since we left the restaurant. Not after Derek stayed behind. Not after his business associates avoided eye contact while we walked out. Not after the entire illusion finally cracked open in front of strangers. Halfway home, Natalie whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. I kept defending him. My hands tightened slightly around the steering wheel. You loved him. That's not an excuse. No, I answered softly, but it's an explanation. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks as she stared out the passenger window. I feel humiliated. My heart broke hearing that, because shame is one of the cruelest consequences of emotional manipulation. Victims often blame themselves for trusting the very person who exploited that trust. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, but neither of us moved. Finally, Natalie looked at me. There's more. The way she said it made my stomach tighten instantly. What do you mean? She opened her purse slowly and removed a thick envelope. I didn't tell you everything before. Fear crept coldly through my chest. Natalie, I was scared. She handed me the envelope with visibly shaking hands. Inside were printed emails, bank notifications, account summaries, photographs of signed documents. Some pages were highlighted. Others had handwritten notes in the margins. I stared at her. You kept all of this. Natalie nodded weakly. At first I thought I was being paranoid. Derek always said I misunderstood financial language. But something stopped feeling right months ago. My pulse quickened as I flipped through the papers. Then suddenly I froze. A signature page. My daughter's signature. Except it didn't look completely right. I looked closer and colder. Natalie, I asked carefully, did you sign this exact version? She leaned over, her face drained immediately. No. I held the paper up. This signature was copied. The room went completely silent. Natalie stared at the page in horror. Oh my God! I kept reading. Several authorization forms appeared altered. Dates changed. Sections added. One document contained a secondary advisory clause Victor never saw in the original draft. My hands began trembling slightly now too, because this was no longer emotional manipulation alone. This was fraud. Natalie covered her mouth. I thought I was losing my mind. No, I whispered. You were being deceived. Then my phone rang. Victor? I answered immediately. Victor. His voice sounded grim. Beverly, I need you and Natalie at my office tomorrow morning. My stomach dropped. What happened? There's been movement. What kind of movement? A regulatory inquiry connected to Carter Financial escalated this afternoon. I closed my eyes briefly. The dinner. Of course. Word spreads quickly in professional circles when reputations crack publicly. Victor continued. And there's something else. Fear settled deeper. One of Derek's lenders filed emergency collection action this morning. Natalie looked up sharply beside me. Lenders, she whispered. I put the call on speaker. Victor's voice filled the room. Yes, Derek appears to be carrying significantly more personal debt than previously disclosed. How much, I asked quietly. A pause. Then, possibly over $2 million. Natalie physically recoiled. "That's impossible." "No," Victor said carefully. "Unfortunately, I don't think it is." After the call ended, the room sat in stunned silence. Finally, Natalie whispered, "He told me we were financially secure." I looked down at the forged documents again. "No," I said softly. "He told you what kept you cooperative." That night, Natalie stayed at my house. Around 2 a.m, I found her sitting alone in Harold's office, staring at one of the old family photographs on the bookshelf. She looked exhausted, broken in a way I had never seen before. I keep replaying everything she whispered without turning around. Every conversation. Every time he made me feel stupid for asking questions. I sat beside her quietly. "Manipulation always sounds reasonable at first." Natalie laughed bitterly. "He used to tell me I was lucky he handled finances because I was too emotional." Rage flared hot inside me again, because I knew exactly what Derek had been doing, shrinking her, little by little, until she questioned herself more than him. Natalie wiped her face. "You know the worst part. What I stopped trusting my own instincts. That sentence nearly destroyed me, because confidence is not something people notice losing immediately. It disappears slowly through repeated dismissal and subtle humiliation. And once someone no longer trusts themselves, they become easier to control everywhere else too." The next morning, Victor's office felt far colder than usual. Natalie sat beside me, clutching coffee she never drank while Victor reviewed documents across his desk. His expression darkened more with every page. Finally, he removed his glasses slowly. "These signatures are problematic." "Problematic," I repeated. "They may constitute fraud." Natalie's breathing became uneven. Victor continued carefully. "Some sections appear altered after signing." I felt sick. Victor slid another document toward us. "This was filed electronically 2 months ago." Natalie stared at it. "I never saw this version." "You wouldn't have," Victor answered grimly, "because this appears to include modified advisory authority." My chest tightened. "Can he access anything?" "Not directly," Victor said quickly. Harold's trust protections prevented deeper exposure. Thank God for Harold. Even dead, that man was still protecting his daughter. Victor leaned forward. But Derek clearly intended long-term positioning. Natalie looked physically ill. "So he married me for money." The pain in her voice shattered something inside me. Victor answered carefully. "I believe Derek likely loved what access to stability represented. Not love, security, control, opportunity." Natalie looked down at her hands. "I don't even know what was real anymore." Before anyone could answer, Victor's assistant knocked and stepped inside. "There's someone here asking for Natalie." Every muscle in my body tightened instantly. "Derek." "Of course." Victor frowned. "I told him this isn't appropriate." Natalie went pale immediately. "I don't want to see him." Victor nodded. "You don't have to." But before the assistant could leave, Derek's voice echoed sharply from the hallway. "Natalie." The sound made her flinch instinctively. That alone enraged me. Victor stood immediately, but Derek appeared in the doorway before anyone could stop him. And for the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely unraveling. No polished confidence, no perfect smile. His tie hung loose. His eyes looked bloodshot. Anger radiated beneath every movement. "Natalie," he said breathlessly, "your mother is destroying everything." Victor stepped forward sharply. "You need to leave." Derek ignored him completely. "She's manipulating you against me." Natalie stared at him in disbelief. Then quietly, heartbreakingly, she asked, "Did you forge my signature?" Silence. Real silence. Derek's expression changed instantly. Not guilt. Calculation. He was deciding which version of reality to sell next. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "You don't understand how complicated these structures are." There it was again. You don't understand. Only now the phrase sounded pathetic instead of powerful. Natalie slowly stood. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "No," she whispered. "I finally do." Something dark crossed Derek's face then. Not sadness, not regret, resentment. Because control was slipping away. "You're making a huge mistake," he snapped. Natalie shook her head slowly. "No, Derek. Marrying you was the mistake. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw my daughter standing tall again. Not healed, not yet, but waking up." Derek's collapse happened slowly at first, then all at once. Within 48 hours of the confrontation at Victor's office, rumors started spreading through Columbus financial circles. Clients began asking questions. Meetings were canceled. One local business publication released a short article mentioning regulatory concerns surrounding Carter Financial Group. The article itself was cautious, but people hear caution like smoke before fire. And once trust disappears in the financial world, everything burns quickly. Natalie stayed with me during those first weeks. At first, she barely slept. Every phone notification made her tense. Every unknown number triggered anxiety. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her sitting quietly in the kitchen wrapped in one of Harold's old sweaters, staring into darkness with untouched tea growing cold beside her. Trauma leaves people exhausted in strange ways. Not just emotionally, physically. Like your body spends months preparing for danger until it forgets how to rest. One morning, I found Natalie crying silently over a grocery receipt. "I used to manage entire hospital departments," she whispered. "Now I second-guess buying cereal." I sat beside her carefully. "That's what control does," I said softly. "It trains people to distrust themselves." She wiped her face angrily. "I hate that he did this to me." "No," I answered gently. "Hate what he tried to turn you into, not who you are." That distinction mattered, because healing begins when people understand manipulation changed their confidence, not their worth. A week later, Natalie officially filed for legal separation. Victor handled everything personally. When Natalie signed the documents, her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I never thought I'd become someone who stayed this long," she admitted quietly afterward. I looked at her carefully. Most intelligent women don't believe manipulation could happen to them. That's why it works. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was watching Natalie grieve the version of Derek she thought existed. Because emotional manipulation creates a strange kind of mourning. You're not only losing a relationship, you're losing the future you believed was real. Meanwhile, Derek became increasingly desperate. He called constantly, texted endlessly. Some messages sounded apologetic, others sounded furious. Then the emotional manipulation intensified. "I made mistakes because I was under pressure. You abandoned me when I needed support. Your mother poisoned you against me." Classic tactics. Never full accountability, always redirection. Victor advised Natalie not to respond. Most days she listened. But one rainy Thursday evening, Derek showed up outside my house unexpectedly. I saw his car through the front window just after sunset. Natalie froze the moment she recognized it. "He can't be here," she whispered. But he was already walking toward the front porch. I stood immediately. "You stay inside." "Mom, I mean it." When I opened the front door, Derek looked terrible. The expensive suits were gone. He wore wrinkled clothes and looked like he hadn't slept properly in days. But what unsettled me most wasn't his appearance. It was his eyes. There was no charm left now, only desperation. "Please," he said immediately. "I need to talk to Natalie. She doesn't want to see you. That's because you've manipulated her." I almost laughed at the irony. "You forged documents." His jaw tightened instantly. "You don't understand how complicated financial structuring works. There's that phrase again." Derek rubbed his face aggressively. "I was trying to stabilize things. Using my daughter, I was trying to save us." No, he was trying to save himself. I could finally see it clearly now. Every compliment, every polished dinner, every family protection conversation, all driven by fear hidden beneath ego. Because Derek built his entire identity around appearing successful, and once that illusion started cracking, he became willing to sacrifice anyone to maintain it. Natalie suddenly appeared behind me. "Mom," she said quietly. "It's okay." I turned immediately. "You don't owe him this." I know, but her expression had changed lately. Stronger, calmer, not fearless, just awake. Slowly she stepped onto the porch beside me. Derek's face softened instantly when he saw her. "Natalie." For one dangerous second, I saw the old version of him return. The polished voice, the carefully wounded expression. "I never wanted things to end like this." Natalie crossed her arms tightly. "Then why did you lie to me I was protecting you?" "No," she said quietly. "You were controlling me." Derek exhaled sharply. "You're listening to your mother instead of your husband." That sentence told me everything. Even now, he still viewed Natalie's independence as someone else's influence rather than her own judgment. Natalie noticed too. "I'm listening to myself," she answered. He stared at her silently. Then his expression shifted again, harder now. "You think you can survive this financially without me?" The threat beneath the words was unmistakable, and suddenly I understood something important. Derek never believed Natalie would leave because he truly believed she needed him. Not emotionally, practically. That was the foundation of his control. Natalie's eyes filled briefly with pain. But then something remarkable happened. She straightened. Not dramatically, quietly. Like someone finally remembering who they used to be. "My father spent my entire childhood teaching me independence," she said softly. "You spent years trying to undo that." Derek looked stunned. She continued calmly. "You know the saddest part. I kept shrinking myself so you could feel powerful." Silence. Rain tapped softly against the porch roof, while Derek stared at her like he no longer recognized the woman in front of him. Because he didn't. The frightened, apologetic Natalie was disappearing, and manipulative people panic when they lose emotional control over someone. "You're making a mistake," he whispered again. Natalie shook her head slowly. "No." Staying was the mistake. For a moment, I thought Derek might explode in anger. Instead, something stranger happened. He looked tired, not remorseful, just defeated. Because deep down, I think he finally realized the game was over. The documents existed. The investigations were growing. The trust structures Harold built protected the core family assets completely. And most importantly, Natalie no longer believed his version of reality. without that manipulation loses oxygen. Derek looked at me one final time. You think you won? I answered honestly, this was never about winning. He laughed bitterly. Easy for wealthy people to say. I stepped closer carefully. No, Derek. Wealth isn't what destroyed you. He frowned. Then what did? I looked directly into his eyes. You confused control with love. Something flickered across his face then. Maybe shame. Maybe anger. Maybe both. Then without another word, he turned and walked back into the rain. Natalie stood silently beside me long after his car disappeared down the street. Finally, she whispered, "Why do I still feel sad?" I wrapped my arm around her shoulders gently, because healing and heartbreak can exist at the same time. She leaned against me quietly, and for the first time in many months, I no longer saw fear in my daughter's eyes, only grief. And grief, unlike manipulation, can actually heal. By October, the air around Lake Briarwood had started turning cold again. The trees surrounding the lake burned gold and deep red beneath the autumn sky, and every morning thin layers of fog floated across the water like something half-dreamed. Natalie stood beside me on the dock, holding a cup of coffee in both hands, while the sunrise reflected softly against the lake. 6 months earlier, I would never have imagined we'd end up here together again like this. Peacefully, quietly. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in moments so small you almost miss them. The first full night of sleep. The first morning you stop checking your phone in fear. The first laugh that doesn't feel guilty. The first decision you make without needing permission. Natalie was beginning to have those moments again. Not every day. Some mornings were still hard. There were still court filings connected to Derek's financial investigations. More former clients had stepped forward after Claire Benson's complaint became public. Carter Financial eventually collapsed completely under regulatory review, and Derek quietly surrendered several professional licenses before formal suspension proceedings could finish. I didn't celebrate any of it. Contrary to what people think, emotional justice rarely feels joyful. Mostly it feels sad, because destruction always leaves wreckage behind even when the right people are finally exposed. Still watching Natalie slowly return to herself became one of the greatest gifts of my life. After separating from Derek, she moved into a small townhouse only 15 minutes from me. Not because she couldn't afford something larger, because she wanted simplicity, control, a fresh beginning built by her own choices. And every weekend we drove together to the lake house. At first, Natalie came only to help clean and organize repairs. Harold had postponed several renovations during his illness, and the property needed attention. But over time, something unexpected happened. The lake house began healing both of us. We repainted old walls together, sorted through Harold's fishing equipment, repaired the dock. One afternoon, Natalie found an old toolbox in the garage with Harold's handwriting still taped across the top. Property isn't valuable because of money. It's valuable because of what it protects. Natalie stared at the words for a very long time. Then quietly she asked, "Did Dad know this might happen someday?" I looked out toward the lake before answering. "Yes," I admitted softly. Not specifically Derek, but he worried about people who confuse charm with character. Natalie sat down slowly beside me on the old workbench. I used to think Dad was overly cautious. So did I sometimes. That made her smile faintly. Then she became quiet again. I still feel embarrassed. I turned toward her immediately. "Natalie." "No, listen." She swallowed hard. I'm not embarrassed because I loved someone. I'm embarrassed because I abandoned myself trying to keep him comfortable. The honesty in her voice nearly broke my heart, because that realization changes people permanently. I sat beside her carefully. Do you know what Harold loved most about you? She looked down. That I worked hard, no. That I was organized. I smiled softly. He loved that you questioned everything. Natalie blinked. What? When you were 8 years old, your teacher sent home a note because you challenged a math worksheet answer. She laughed weakly through tears. Oh my God. Your father framed that worksheet in his office for 6 months because he was so proud of you. Natalie covered her mouth while crying softly. Derek didn't fall in love with a weak woman, I said gently. He spent years trying to create one. That truth changed something inside her. I could see it. Because victims of manipulation often believe they became foolish. But the reality is usually the opposite. Manipulative people target empathy, intelligence, loyalty, and trust. The very qualities that make someone good. A few weeks later, Natalie came over for dinner carrying a laptop and several folders. What's all this? I asked. She smiled nervously. My finances. I stared at her. I want to understand everything again. That moment meant more to me than I can explain. So we sat together at the dining room table for nearly 4 hours, reviewing accounts, budgets, trust summaries, retirement plans, insurance documents, and property records. Not because Natalie was incapable, because confidence returns through participation. Question by question, she slowly rebuilt trust in herself. And for the first time in years, nobody interrupted her. Nobody mocked her. Nobody made her feel unintelligent for asking careful questions. Around midnight, Natalie suddenly looked at me and whispered, I forgot I used to be good at this. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand gently. You still are. That winter snow covered the lake house completely. Natalie and I spent Christmas there together beneath Harold's old string lights hanging across the porch. We cooked too much food, watched old movies, and laughed harder than we had in years. At one point, Natalie stood by the fireplace staring at Harold's photograph quietly. I think he knew you'd protect me. I smiled softly. Actually, your father protected you himself. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I stood and walked toward the bookshelf near the fireplace. Inside the bottom cabinet sat a thick sealed folder Harold instructed me never to open unless absolutely necessary. Slowly, I handed it to her. Natalie opened it carefully. Inside were original trust documents, protective clauses, asset restrictions, long-term inheritance structures. Every layer designed specifically to prevent outside financial exploitation through marriage or coercion. Natalie looked stunned. He created all this years ago? Yes. Well, I smiled sadly, because Harold grew up watching women lose everything after trusting the wrong people. Tears filled her eyes again. He thought this far ahead. Your father trusted love, I answered softly, but he trusted preparation more. Natalie cried quietly while holding the documents against her chest, and for the first time since Harold died, the grief between us felt lighter somehow. Not gone, just gentler, because suddenly we could both see the same truth clearly. Real love does not humiliate. It does not control. It does not shrink people to protect fragile egos. Real love prepares, protects, respects. Later that night, Natalie and I stood together outside beneath the winter stars while snow drifted silently across the frozen lake. I think I'm finally starting to feel like myself again, she whispered. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. No, I said softly. You're becoming someone even stronger. And standing there beside my daughter beneath the quiet sky Harold once loved so much, I realized something beautiful. Derek Carter almost stole Natalie's confidence, but he failed. Because the one thing stronger than manipulation is a woman who finally remembers her own worth. Some of the deepest wounds in life are not caused by strangers. They come from the people we trusted enough to lower our guard around. This story was never really about money. It was about confidence, dignity, and the quiet ways manipulation can slowly make good people doubt themselves. One thing I learned through all of this is that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. Loving someone does not mean surrendering your voice, your instincts, or your independence. Real love will never humiliate you to feel powerful. It will never make you feel small for asking questions, and it will never ask you to abandon yourself in order to keep the peace. Financial independence is not just about wealth. It is about safety. It is about having the ability to stand up when something feels wrong. It is about protecting your future and trusting your own judgment even when someone tries to convince you that you are incapable. And sometimes healing begins the moment you finally remember who you were before someone made you question your worth. If this story touched your heart, I would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced manipulation, control, or being underestimated by someone close to you? And where are you watching from today? Your stories matter here. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional storytelling like this, and thank you for spending this journey with me.